Well, thank you all for coming, and welcome to the March 2011 Intellectual Property Breakfast Club. The Intellectual Property Breakfast Club is a program of BroadbandBreakfast.com. We're a news and events service focusing on internet and intellectual property policy. And I'd like to, at first, thank our sponsors of the Intellectual Property Breakfast Club, the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and Public Knowledge. If you could join me in thanking the sponsors. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day, Sarah Lai Sterland. She's BroadbandBreakfast.com's contributing editor. Lai Sterland joined Broadband Breakfast from a background of covering business, finance, and legal affairs, telecommunications, and tech policy for 15 years from New York, Washington, and San Francisco. She has written for Red Herring, National Journal's Technology Daily, Portfolio.com, and Wired.com. She's a native of London and Hong Kong and is currently based in San Francisco. And the name of our program today is Patent Reform in the 112th Congress. I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. I hope you're well. Thank you for coming for this timely topic. As everyone knows, the Senate voted on cloture yesterday, and we'll probably get a vote to pass the S23 by tomorrow. So I'm relying on Dana to give us a full rundown on what's in the legislation. But I think we've been talking about this since 2005, and I think what's really different is that President Obama's made patent reform a priority as part of his innovation agenda. And I just thought that was very interesting. I never thought I'd see someone from the White House selling patent reform like a car salesman in an online video. But I thought that was totally awesome, very interesting. And I mean, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean that in a good sense. He was really pushing it, meaning the administration's really taking a strong interest in this subject, which I think is really exciting. So one of the interesting statistics that Austin Goolsbee, the chairman of the Board of Economic Advisors, came up with yesterday or the day before was that it took Alexander Graham Bell a month to receive his patent for the telephone. But nowadays it takes about an average of 3 years to get a patent, and that's a problem in the eyes of the administration because they want us to speed up the process so that we can get more jobs out there, so that small businesses can get their patent, hire people, and get the venture financing. The real question, of course, is there a real problem in the patent system? Are there too many patents being issued or not, and what are the quality of the patents? And that's what we have the panelists here to discuss today. As everyone knows, we have former Chief Federal Circuit Judge Paul R. Michel. I don't think he really needs that much of an introduction. Hans Sauer, General Counsel, General Counsel of BIO, which is the main organization for the biotechnology companies in the United States. And we've got Dana Colarulli, who is a very good friend of mine, who's Director of Government Affairs for the U.S. Patent Office, and Brian Pomper, who's the Executive Director of the Innovation Alliance, which is a company of, I'm not sure how many companies, but of mid-sized companies, right?
A bunch.
A bunch of tech companies like Tessera and I think Digimarc's one of your members, right? And they've been tracking this issue for a long time. So Dana, can you please, one of the questions I had from the audience already was, can you give us a rundown of what's in S23, what's in there? I know First to File's in there.
First to File definitely is in there. That's one of the provisions that's, I think, the administration has strongly supported from the beginning of the debate. We think is one of the, will have maybe probably the largest impact, perhaps next to issues about funding in the bill. So the bill does include, I always describe the bill as having, from the very beginning of this debate, having three categories. The first is simplifying measures, moving the system from a first to invent to a first to file system. It both provides opportunities to simplify the process and also enables work sharing. That's one category. Second category is reforms at the office, and that's things like creating a post-grant opposition system, creating an administrative proceeding to challenge patents after they're granted. That's a quality check. And there are other provisions that address office operations, including providing the office with fee-setting authority to set the various different fees, both on the statutory side and the regulatory side. Right now, we have the ability to change around about 20% of our fees. That's just the regulatory fees. But the majority of our income, about 80%, comes from statutory fees under 35 Section 41. So the fee-setting authority provision would give us more discretion to consider changes that might be helpful, not just to make sure that the office is bringing in the income it needs, but also that the fees have the right balance for the different proceedings. And then the third was litigation, and there's some provisions of litigation we can talk more about.
Okay. Well, just finish that thought for me. Sorry.
From the very beginning, that's the third category of issues that I think the folks that were looking at this legislation wanted to address. Uncertainty in litigation, whether you're talking about damages, willfulness, venue, those are all provisions that were talked about to lessen the uncertainty in litigation. And that many of those have been the drivers of this litigation from the beginning. There's good arguments to say that the court has actually made some progress.
Right, so those provisions were taken out, right?
And we're seeing a move to bring those out. Certainly that's the case in the Senate bill.
Okay. Do you have any, there's been so much sturm and drang over this legislation for so long, for the past 6 years. And, you know, I think it's easy to get confused by anyone who supports what. You've got small businesses who are for this and who are against this. The National Small Business Association has written a letter against the legislation, even though this is supposed to drive small businesses, drive job growth. Do you have a top 5 list of myths or anything like that?
You know, I have a few myths, and okay. You know, my fear is that others will probably have the same myths as I do. I think that the biggest myth is that the switch from first to invent to first to file hurts small businesses. So there's a couple sub-myths in that. One is that it completely eradicates any type of grace period that small businesses have right now. Second is that the system will be less accessible to small businesses, and I think both of those are. And maybe I'll add a third. A third is that small businesses would be treated substantially different or have different opportunities under a first inventor to file system as current law, meaning that they would not be able to acquire their rights. I think all three of those have really good answers, and all three of those are not true.
Okay, well, let me, Judge Michel, we talked about this on the phone last week a little bit, about the impact on the grace period. Can you explain to the audience and to people who will be watching this afterwards why this is a concern what is the grace period and what's the concern?
Well, I'd like to start at a little more basic level. It seems to me that the debate in Congress, the hearings in Congress, and the legislation drafting and amending in Congress has been largely reactive to strong lobbying by certain special interests and a variety of special interests, and of course they're entitled to be heard. They have a constitutional right to be heard, and that's the way the system is supposed to work. But because of the very powerful lobbying in the middle of the last decade and during the 5 years of hearings, the legislation didn't start off focusing on what's needed for a better system. It started off focused on what some people said was wrong with the current system. So it seems to me that it's missed a lot. In my view, the most important thing for the system to work better for all concerned is for it to be much faster. faster to grant patents, faster to enforce patents in the court, faster to impose remedies. Secondly, the system needs to be strong, because it's supposed to incentivize sharing of new technical information, the disclosures in the patent, to incentivize more investment in research and development and in commercialization of new products. So the system has to be faster and stronger. It also needs to be clearer in the sense of the scope of rights granted need to be as clear as they possibly can be made. And finally, it needs to be, in my view, well balanced so that it serves all types of technology, all size companies, every player in the system, including, very importantly, the venture capitalists and the equity fund managers and the other people who provide the capital that all but the largest, richest companies need to do R&D and to grow and to commercialize. So it seems to me not enough attention has been focused on how to incentivize more investment in R&D and commercialization. So in my view, the bill currently pending in the Senate has a lot in it that's perfectly beneficial, but it doesn't focus on the biggest problems adequately, in my opinion, which are to have faster, stronger remedies. And my worry is that the ultimate unintended consequence that so often comes along with ambitious legislation is that it may have some negative effects that aren't recognized when it's passed, and in some respects it may make things slower, weaker, less certain, more expensive, and I wonder whether those risks have been adequately attended to and limited by recrafting the legislation. Now, of course, one hopes that whatever improvements could be made in the Senate bill, which it seems sure to pass, can be made by the House. On the other hand, the rush to get something finished to satisfy the voters that the elected politicians have done something to create new jobs and help get us out of the terrible enduring recession may mean that there'll be almost no further improvements in S23 on the House side. And if that happens, I think in 2 or 3 years, we'll be right back where we started, and we'll be talking about round 2 of patent reform, because there'll have turned out to be lots of negative, large negative consequences. And something as limited as whether the grace period should only cover disclosures by somebody like a university professor, or whether it should cover, as current law does, a broader set of actors and what they disclose and what then becomes prior art to block issuance of a patent, is a relatively small issue as I see the big picture. And I think the country needs to focus on the big picture, because the system is supposed to be instrumental. It's supposed to produce certain results. It's not philosophy or religion or even really politics. It's all a question of, does it work? Does it work effectively? Does it achieve the goals it's supposed to achieve? And I think the legislation needs more work if it's going to succeed.
But Judge Michel, isn't your main point that the office should receive proper funding, and under this legislation it would, right?
Well, under the legislation, the office will receive modest increases in funding over a period of several years. But the office is 10 years behind already, and Congress already has diverted almost $1 billion of compulsory user fees paid under statutory requirements. They're not going to get that back, and they're not going to get a whole lot of new revenue right away. They'll be able to increase their revenue gradually over a period of years. You know, half the fees approximately don't even kick in for many years after the patent issued. It's not all upfront application fees. A lot of it is so-called maintenance fees, and there's some other fees too. So the idea that we've now equipped the office to do an optimal job starting right away, I think is a total fiction. It'll take 5 years of ramp up to beat the backlog and to have an efficient system even if everything in the bill passes. So we still have a resource deficit in the Patent Office, and it was caused by Congress, and it isn't being totally fixed by Congress. The real fix would be to give the office back the 800 and some million dollars that were diverted over the last 18 years or so.
Right.
So again, I think the bill moves in the right direction, but not nearly far enough to actually do what the country needs.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. The bill sucks, and we should move on.
No, it doesn't. It's a good bill, but it's not a finished product. It needs further adjustment. I'm in favor of the bill. I'm in favor of patent reform. Okay. I'm not against it. So I don't want to be misunderstood.
Okay.
But it's not a finished product.
Right.
It's being rushed apparently in both houses of Congress because of public pressures, which are understandable. But it's very important for the country to get patent reform right, to optimize the improvements in the system. We're probably not going to have many chances to do it, and so we better use the current chance effectively for the good of all industries and the country.
Right. So, Brian, can you chime in and give us a sense of what your companies think of the legislation, and particularly we talked a little bit about one specific issue last week about challenges at the Patent Office. You might want to talk about that.
I'd say, the Innovation Alliance, just to pick up what you said, is a group of largely, I'd say, middle-sized companies to smaller companies, or one or two larger companies. But they're high-tech companies who really rely heavily on the strength of their patents and really want a strong working patent system. This is not the bill the Innovation Alliance companies would have written. I'd say not by a long shot. I'll say officially the Innovation Alliance is neutral on S23, so we neither support nor oppose it. I would just note that the course of this bill started really as a litigation reform bill, I would say, brought by large high-tech companies who felt like they were really disadvantaged in the litigation environment. Their business models are such that strong patents don't work for them. So I think the goal of the legislation at the time was in some respects to weaken patent rights. And there were a lot of companies, Bio was one of them, and many others, companies and organizations that worked to change the law. Over time, I think they've succeeded in changing the law to the point where some organizations and companies actually now support it, like Bio and others. And groups like the Innovation Alliance, I would say, sort of grudgingly acknowledge that, okay, there's been a lot of progress. It's a lot better than it was. Still not what we would have written. I think we would largely agree with Judge Michel that the single number one absolute top priority in any legislation should have been, and this is where we should have started, is reducing the backlog. You've got however many, depending on how you count, 700,000, 1 million. Dana knows better than I exactly how many patents are in that backlog, and the way we look at it, every single one of those patents is potentially the next, Dell, Google, Microsoft employing, hundreds or thousands of people, but they're sitting on a shelf gathering dust, and it's not like you can take them off the shelf 3 years from now and they'll be just as good then as they are now. Time moves on, so we really feel like the best patent reform would have been one that focused on reducing that backlog, giving the PTO the resources it needs to plan into the future, which is something that I don't think you've mentioned yet, really, that if you have to rely on this kind of yearly process, you can't necessarily put in place longer-term strategies in the way that really any business would.
Well, let me jump in there. This is always a perennial problem about the funding. Dana or anyone else on the panel, what do you think will change this year? It's always really the appropriators who are the ones who won't let go. What's going to convince them this year to let go of the money?
Well, let me start with, I've been dutifully writing down myths here as we've gone through, and I think we have a lot of good advocates in support of the patent system, and a lot of good focus on making sure that the right balance for users and the right resources are available to make sure the system is working well. I think, let me make an acknowledgement here. I think no one thinks that patent reform legislation is the panacea, but it does do many very good things. And there's a number of things I think that the administration supports in there. But all of that has to be taken in context. All of that has to be, it's not in a vacuum. there's funding and resources, there's short-term ways to address that, and there's long-term
But Dana,
ways to address that.
can you answer my question? What do you think? Sorry.
Answer the question.
I want to know what's going to change the appropriators' mind, because it's something that we've all been agonizing over.
I think indications on the Senate bill, which includes at least one way to address the funding issue at the PTO long-term. That was the Coburn amendment. I think, there had been traditional opposition there, and now you see that vehicle moving forward. That's certainly one way.
Right.
Another way, though, is to continue to, and I think both the office and the administration and our user community has been making a very good point here, that in order for the office to work well, it needs funding. And it needs stability. It needs to be able to plan in a multi-year way, multi-year budgets. We now have at the office, I think, good leadership. I think folks that are looking at this in a multi-year, there's a multi-year challenge. It needs a multi-year solution. So, the director testified in front of the House Commerce, Justice, Science Committee of Appropriations 2 weeks ago. And I think, as the congressional person, it actually was a great opportunity, right? Opportunity to tell the story. And we have a good director that actually can spell out what are the things that you need, not this year, but next year, and what are the costs.
So there was real interest in it.
There was real interest there, and I think nothing is going to change the need for the office to look in a multi-year way, to identify its resources and make changes.
Okay.
And we're doing that. I think the legislation offers complementary things, but that's not going to take the place of the office actually doing a better job at what it's doing, which
Okay,
is what we're doing now.
Sarah, the answer to your question
Yep.
is political will by the judiciary committees in the House and the Senate, because the appropriators in both bodies of Congress can't be expected to be eager to give up power and control and the use of money, even if some of us would think it's an illicit use to take user fees paid by patent applicants and patent owners and use them as if they were tax revenue. So what's needed is will. Now, the Senate has shown some will. Will the House show the same will? Well, we'll find out pretty soon. Last year, Chairman Conyers and of course they've switched roles, and Ranking Member Smith put in a bill that would have fixed the funding problem, and it went absolutely nowhere in the House. So it's not clear to me that the #1 need of patent reform, which is a huge amount of additional cash and resources for the PTO, is actually going to happen, and it's going to take a change of heart on the part of a lot of legislators. And it's not just the Judiciary Committee members versus the Appropriations Committee members, because all the members of both bodies who are not on appropriations themselves feel very dependent on those who are to help out with pet projects that are important in their district or their state. So there's a tremendous underground force that will make a lot of legislators who aren't themselves on the Appropriations Committee very hesitant to confront the appropriators and reduce their power. That's what needs to happen. That's the naked, plain fact here, and I'm not sure it's going to happen. For me, if we don't fix the funding of the PTO, we should just scrap patent reform altogether. It's not worth having at all if it doesn't include a permanent, sufficient fix to the PTO resource problem.
Okay, I think everyone would agree with that. Hans, I'd like you to jump in. Can you tell me why, can you tell me a bit more about why BIO supports the legislation now, whereas several years ago it did not?
Yeah, well, BIO was a little late to the table on patent reform. And if we go back to the times when the big commercially powerful constituencies in favor of some form of patent reform were forming, and that was in about 2004, 2005. Those constituencies were mainly on the side of the high-tech industries, the information technology companies, later joined by the financial services industries, people who wanted change in the patent system because they felt the patent system didn't work very well with their business model. Now, biotech to some extent, and other life sciences industries, were not in that camp. For them, the patent system as it does today works reasonably well and accommodates their business model. Biotech is a very patent-dependent industry that relies very much on patent rights for licensing, product development, investment decisions over in a very slow innovation cycle in biotech. Biotech products take a long time to get to market, and once these products are in the market, they're also very long-lived. So there was always, I think, a tendency to be enamored a little bit with the status quo, with the way the substantive patent law works for our industry, that made biotech, as an industry, kind of slow to get on board with patent reform. What really did it was the realization that the bills that were introduced in the early 109th Congress, once we looked at them, left no other conclusion than that this patent reform would make it harder to get patents, and if they could be had, it would be easier to kill them, and if they can't be killed, they're cheaper to infringe. That's what these bills did, and people said, look, we've got to do something about this. We have to enter the debate on patent reform, and we must have not just a hell no answer, but we must have an affirmative answer of if we don't want that, what kind of patent reform would we want?
What were the main changes that changed it?
What really changed it was that the big and most controversial issues in patent reform, all the areas of litigation reform that would make it more difficult to enforce patents and that would make it cheaper to infringe them, and by making them cheaper to infringe would impact the value of IP across the board in the marketplace, that those provisions were gradually taken out of the bill. They've now been dropped completely. That's one example of the kind of thing that had to be removed from the bill in order for BIO to say, we will look at the rest of the bill, and in the aggregate we feel it's good enough for the system that we think this must be supported. Biotech as a whole, I can tell you, is a relatively mixed constituency. We have BIO members who very much are in favor of this bill, and we have others who are quite indifferent and who say, look, we shouldn't rush this as well, because the patent law operates reasonably well for biotech as it is. But, so there's no uniform opinion. I can tell you, as an organization, we've come to the conclusion, and we've made that decision, that we say this bill that we have now is the high watermark of patent reform, and it's the best work product that we've seen.
What's the average time? I know the average time to get a patent is 3 years, but what about in the biotech industry? I'm interested in this whole idea of time lags and how important it is to get
dependency of applications in the life sciences and in biotech is slightly above average. So it's in the 3-year, a little less than 3-year range, actually. But that is not so crucial for most biotech companies, except when they are under a particular pressure to get a patent quickly to meet a goal in their business plan or to attract capital early on.
I'm sorry, is this change from first to file, first to invent to first to file going to have a big impact on biotechnology companies?
I haven't heard that. I mean, most biotech companies are small companies. Of our 1,100 members, only about 24 have a product that they sell. The rest are development stage companies that treat the patent system as if it were de facto already a first to file system, because they want to reserve their patent rights not just in the United States but internationally as well. So as a matter of substantive law, they have to imagine and they have to comply with patent laws of foreign countries and treat their own disclosures, treat everything they do with IP as if they were under a first-to-file system. Otherwise, they destroy the patentability of their inventions in Europe and Japan and other markets where eventually they want to be active. So for biotech companies, it's already a first-to-file world. And for that reason, we have, for years, heard very little commentary and had no controversy over the shift to a first inventor-to-file system that's now in the bill. People go, we're doing that already.
Right, but it's probably going to be an issue again in the House, because there have been so many letters from a large bunch of conservatives who wrote that letter to all their House members about how this is against the American spirit and about how changing the patent legislation, the patent system is American spirit. And we're a country that came up with the iPad. So, what's wrong with the system? Why do we need to change it?
Yeah, the iPad, I don't think exists because we're in a first to invent world in the United States. I very much
I think that's right.
doubt that that's the case. I think the odd thing about debating now at this late stage in the game, the transition to a first inventor to file system, is that the concept has been in very much the form in which we see it today on the table since 2005. And there's been no discussion about it for a number of years until relatively recently, I would say 6 to 8 months, when this has come up. The proponents of a switch back to a first to invent system, I see them fall into two camps. It's small businesses who are not biotech businesses, and it is oddly enough large high-tech companies who have for years asked for other things in patent reform that are now not in the bill, and who have now late in the game identified first to file as a big obstacle to passing patent reform. You know, that's very mysterious to me, and I can see that you may have some remarks on that.
Well, Sarah, the thing to focus on, in my opinion, is not to get too bogged down in first to file versus first to invent, not too bogged down even in how large a scope should the grace period have, or should there even be a grace period. The really important thing to focus on is how will all this actually operate in practice. If there is a significant segment of small companies, and I don't know whether there is or not, but there's some evidence there might be, who are cash poor and can't afford to file early and repeated applications, even provisional applications, then maybe there's a problem that should be attended to. Very hard to follow all this. It's not the fault of the Congress that they've had trouble and have changed so much from the first bill to now. Even this morning in the New York Times, for example, an editorial said that there's no problem for small businesses because they can file a provisional application and the fee is only $410 or whatever the amount is, a very minor amount. But of course, that's not the problem. It's the attorney's fee, not the filing fee. And the attorney's fees average something on the order of $40,000 per application. So it's easy to get confused about these things. I think the real issue is going to turn out to be not so much whether we pretty much already have people acting as if it's a first-to-file system, or whether there are some segments of the patent-dependent community who have economic difficulties in filing earlier than they do now. The real problem is going to turn out to be even if we can get patents issued much faster, like the Edison patent, less than 3 months. Now it averages 3 years and it's going up. The question then becomes, can you enforce them rapidly and effectively? The bill creates new post-issuance procedures that have the potential, in my opinion, to make court enforcement unavailable for as long as a decade after a patent issues. And if that comes to pass, the patent system will be much, much weaker. Now, maybe the patent office will be able to handle ex parte, the one-party re-examinations under current law, which continue unchanged. And maybe the patent office will be able to handle the new modified two-party version of re-examination that doesn't exist today. And maybe they'll even be able to handle the third over-layered procedure called post-grant review. But the question is whether the office or anybody will be able to prevent clever litigators from gaming the system so that they can keep a patent tied up in the patent office for 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 9 years in serial challenges to the validity of the patent, and meanwhile get the district court infringement litigation put on ice for up to a decade. If that happens, the value of all patents will plummet. The incentives to do more research, faster, better commercialization will plummet, investment will plummet, job creation will fall. So the real problem here is not what do the words on the bill say or what's the theory. The real problem is can it be gamed and manipulated and easily abused in real life by the actual players who are going to be trying to do it. And it looks to me like it's a field day for delay in a system where delay is already the biggest problem in grants and enforcement.
Dana, do you have any response?
Yeah, I mean, I think the judge is exactly right. That it really, will fall on how it's implemented. Although I'm not sure it's necessarily, how many proceedings are available. It does go to how are they coordinated, and to what extent does the bill address potential abuses. I think some of that can be addressed in legislation, some of that can't. And some of that's going to be on how the office implements it. And you'll note in each of these sections that the office is directed to issue regulations to make sure that they hit this right balance. So we're going to have to do a very robust public discussion on where that balance is. But I think if you have basically a menu of options here, and not every option is going to be appropriate for every litigant. I think the judge is right. The worst thing for the system is for patents to be stuck in the system, whether at the PTO or in the district court, for that matter, and not get to the marketplace. The intent of all these provisions is to not have that hold up and get those patents to the marketplace.
Look at the numbers. 2 of the 3 procedures for issued patents to be challenged, created by the bill, will be adjudicated by the appeals board at the patent office. That's about 80 people who already are swamped, whose decisions are often years delayed, and that was true even when their total inventory was less than 4,000. The inventory at the appeals board today is over 20,000, a 5-fold increase in just a couple years. So the idea that this group can do its regular work and do these 2 new procedures and do them really rapidly raises questions of, is this realistic? So you're saying
that I thought that the initial impetus behind this was that these proceedings would be less costly and quicker, but you're saying that that's just not going to happen.
Well, it depends on whether they can be implemented, whether the machinery and the resources are there. If we had as many board members proportionate to examiners as the Japanese patent office does, we'd have several hundred administrative patent judges, not 80. If we had several hundred, maybe they could do this. But we don't have several hundred, we have 80, and it's not easy to boost that number fast, and these proceedings are things they've never done before. This requires them to act like a district judge without a jury. They've never done that before. It's going to take lots of training, lots of experimentation, regulations to be issued, to be modified and refined, lots of supervision and adjustment, and if it slows down the system, and the guarantees are hollow. There's a guarantee that the decision in these new procedures will be within a year. But if you look at the fine print, there's no enforcement of that at all. If the decision doesn't come down in a year, does the patent applicant or the patent owner in a post-issuance proceeding get any relief? No. It's not enforceable. So it's an aspirational goal to do it in a year. But it might actually take 2 or 3 years. And if you have serial proceedings, and remember, they can all be appealed. Anything that's done by the Central Re-Exam Unit can be appealed to the board and then the Federal Circuit, adding several more years of delay. Even the new proceedings that start out in the board and end in the board can be appealed to the Federal Circuit. That can add a year or 2 of delay. So we're talking about massive potential for huge delays.
I mean, remember, first of all, the comparison is district court litigation, which is a much more open proceeding and it already causes a lot of delay. I think right now the judge is right. We have 80 judges doing these proceedings. The office will have to increase that. But, with adequate resources, there's a lot of things we can do. But again, I go back to my original point. None of that says that there isn't room for the PTO to improve. And we, looking at, even notwithstanding legislation, looking at ex parte and inter partes, we're making changes that we think we can get these proceedings done in a year.
Give us one example.
Well, there's a lot of, under the statute, there's a lot of obligatory time limits. So a time for reply. There's a 60-day period which you have. To the extent that applicants can waive those proceedings, to the extent that we do other things to speed up our process, it reduces the proceeding that will require, under the statute, to take at least 6 months to a year and more to something much less. So, to the extent that we can move faster and we can do a better job with these, and we can dispel some of these issues that actually would be subject to litigation, much more costly, longer litigation, we're actually providing a service. But I do think it's both the way that it's implemented and it's the structure. What we're talking about in the Patent Reform Bill is providing the structure to allow us to be successful here, to provide an alternative. a lot of it is going to come down to the implementation, and then the burden is on the office.
Okay,
Sarah, you put your finger exactly on the problem. Will this bill, as actually possible to implement in the current machinery, with the current resources, and gradually ramping up with some fee increases, cut total delay, or it will add to total delay? You put your finger exactly on the right problem. You know, patents can't be enforced in the patent office. They only get value in the district court. So the end game is in the district court. Now, if these procedures can speed up district court litigation and save people money, then I'm all for them. But if they have the opposite effect, we'll be in a worse world, not a better world.
Well, last week we discussed the idea on the phone of creating special or assigning patent cases to certain courts that have expertise. Maybe not creating a whole new system, but creating certain courts that at the district level that deal with patent cases, like kind of like foreign intelligence surveillance courts. Is that something that the administration's ever considered?
Outside of my expertise, I'm here to talk about the office, but it's certainly been part of the discussion over the last 10 plus years.
Sarah, the courts have the same problem as the patent office, under-resourced for more than a decade. There are over 100 judicial vacancies. That's almost 15% of the workforce missing in action because White Houses in multiple administrations and Senates over multiple Congresses have failed to fill the vacancies promptly. So the judiciary doesn't have enough judges, just like the patent office doesn't have enough examiners or administrative judges. And the positions that it does have are chronically underfilled. So yes, district court litigation is too slow, just like patent grant and patent review is too slow. And the solution primarily is the same thing: much more resources as fast as you can get them in there. And as in terms of expertise, my experience in 22 years on the court was that those judges who routinely handled patent cases, regardless of whether they had any interest in science, had any technical training in science, became quite good almost always in handling patent cases. And correspondingly, those judges who only saw a patent case, tried one every 5th year, were not very good at it. So obviously, experience and immersion and exposure is the best way to teach generalist judges to be effective trial judges in a patent case.
We should just focus all the litigation in Marshall, Texas, and have set up an airline, a patent airline.
No, I think that the appeal of Marshall, Texas, to a great extent, was that it used to be fast, and it's not so fast anymore. Right. So the appeal is going down. But all of the judges who handle lots of cases, in my opinion, including those in Eastern Texas, do quite a good job overall because of extensive experience. They get good at it. So what I would do is create a court with maybe 50 or 60 judges selected from all around the country by the Chief Justice. They would continue to do their regular work with a reduced caseload as district judges in their districts, and half of their time would be spent handling patent cases, and they would do all the patent cases. Within a year, those 50 or 60 judges, and of course you could select the ones who are already good at it, so they'd be good on day one, but anybody who wasn't a great patent trial judge on day one would be at the end of a single year. Cases would move faster, they'd be more accurate, there'd be less reversals, and costs would go down. And the most important thing would be the value of valid patents would go up, 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 incentivizing the investment that the country needs.
Okay, take that, House Judiciary Committee members, if you're listening in on the internet. Brian.
Well, first I want to associate my remarks, or associate myself with Judge Michel's remarks on the importance of getting through the system quickly. I think the people who pushed originally for patent reform had a view that, most patents are invalid, and we got to find new ways to knock out these invalid patents. But it turns out most patents are valid. And from the view of the Innovation Alliance, yes, there are some bad patents. So create procedures. If they're bad, get them out quickly. But if they're good, you want them to get out from underneath that cloud of uncertainty. Is it a good patent? Is it a bad patent? Because while they're in that netherworld, they have no economic utility, really. Hard to attract investment, hard to commercialize, hard to create jobs. We think that's bad. Now, I'll say, institutionally, PTO can certainly do some internal regulations to discourage abuse of the new procedures. I think also legislatively, The bill evolved to a point where the Innovation Alliance felt like there were a few changes to the post-grant review system that was included in the bill that minimized the potential for abuse. And we think those are really important. It was actually the critical point at which the Innovation Alliance removed its opposition to the bill and became neutral. And I would say just, there are a few, there are really four safeguards. The first is, if you're going to file a post-grant review challenge, you have to have a reason to do so. You can't just do it to harass somebody. You know, you have to meet a certain threshold.
What's the threshold? I
Well,
mean,
the threshold, effectively, it's you got to show a prima facie case. You got to show it's more likely than not that
I predict the House will take that out.
Well,
There'll be no threshold.
This is exactly the issue. In the Senate bill, you have these four safeguards. You've got a reasonably high threshold. You got to basically show a prima facie case of invalidity of at least one claim of the patent. Right?
And Judge Michel, you think that because the Silicon Valley companies want that, right? I mean, Google.
I'm not guessing. I
yeah.
testified at a House
right.
hearing on February 11th. The
Yeah.
witness for the Fairness Coalition, David Simon, said
Intel.
he wants all of Intel, but speaking for the companies of the
Which is
Fairness
Google,
Coalition,
Apple, and a lot of other Silicon Valley
he said,
companies.
we want no limitations of any kind, temporal, scope, estoppel, or anything else on any of the post-grant validity challenge procedures back at the PTO. So it's perfectly clear. They want to be able to tie up a patentee indefinitely in the patent office and kill infringement litigation, which will have to be in the second decade before it gets to the issue of was there
So,
infringement
Brian,
or not.
can I just follow up on this
Well, let me-
issue?
if I can't just
okay,
talk about
go
it,
ahead.
there's four, right? And I'll be quick, right? So the first is you got to have a prima facie case, threshold. The second one is there's a presumption of validity when you're in the post-grant challenge. You know, if you're granted a patent, you spent 3 years, you spent tens of thousands of dollars getting your patent, it's presumed valid, say if you're in court litigation. But under the old version of the legislation, there was no presumption of validity. So congratulations, you have a patent, you've now got to prove it's valid all over again in the post-grant challenge. We thought that that was unfair and bad policy. The bill, S23, changes it. There's now the person challenging the patent has to prove invalidity by preponderance of the evidence. We think that's a good change. Another one is you get one bite at the apple in the post-grant system. You can't, as the judge says, you shouldn't be allowed to anyway, file repeat challenges. You know, you got 5 arguments against a patent, I'll file 2 now, I'll get the challenge. If I lose those, then I'll file 2 later, then I'll file my last one. And these small guys, especially, who are thinly capitalized, they can't keep defending against patent. A lot of patents are actually, when they're challenged, right, they're abandoned because a lot of the small guys can't afford to defend against the challenge. It seems to me, for the system as a whole, you shouldn't get more than one bite at the apple. Bring all of your challenges in one form. So the bill changes that. It has a provision called could have raised estoppel. You're barred from bringing a later challenge on any ground that you actually raised or could have raised in the first challenge. And the last one is
the House will take out.
yeah, and the last one is the timeline, which Judge Michel notes. There's no enforcement mechanism, but we think it's good to have in the bill just to have a signal that there's got to be some period after which this cloud of uncertainty over the patent gets resolved one way or the other. But I agree with Judge Michel. This is exactly what the proponents of the original proponents of patent reform, the bigger high-tech companies, would love to take on the bill. There's an amendment in the Senate that they tried to push. I'm sure they will try to do it in the House. We think that would be very bad for the system to remove those safeguards because we think it does open up the system to abuse.
What's interesting, the thing that I was going to note was that you have all these, they're all technology companies, and if you're not in this world, to the average lawmaker, you have Silicon Valley against Silicon Valley. Nobody agrees on how this should work. How do you think this is going to turn out?
Well, I mean, I'd like to. I keep going back to this
Yeah.
myth idea.
Right.
Let me dispel one more myth, and that's that the main thrust behind patent reform has always been high tech. I actually don't think that's the case. I can say from someone now who's been around for a while. I've been working on a number of these provisions since 2002. I think my boss, the director, Dave Kapos, has been working on a lot of these same provisions that are reflected in this bill since 2000. Now, there's been a lot of other things that have been added, but you know, the main components of this bill, the switch to first inventor to file, been discussed in the U.S. since 1966, the President Johnson's commission. Post-grant opposition. It's been discussed since the AIPA in '99 passed. The major IP association said, you know, this would be a good idea, a check on the system if it's done right. There's always fear about I think as Brian says appropriately, and Brian and I have talked about this, extending the cloud of uncertainty. Well, if it's an efficient proceeding, if it has a meaningful result at the end of it, you pick your forum, and it's at the expert agency, less expensive, hopefully, less time, hopefully. All depends on us implementing it right. Those are good things. Those are things that were pushed not necessarily by high tech, but by the IP community as a whole. Now, issues like damages, issues like willfulness, issues like venue were also issues that the IP community looked at as a whole. But high tech said, we need some real relief. I think while we've had this discussion in front of Congress, the courts have moved along. They have addressed these issues in a way that's given a lot of those folks much more certainty. No longer needed from the bill. The administration is was supportive of taking those provisions out. We sent up a SAP, I guess it was last week. Time's moving quickly. So I think the concept that this bill was started and was for high tech, I think is not true. There's been a number of people that have come to the table, including a very strong effort by high tech to ensure that this bill addresses their concerns. But I think there's been many people that have been involved in the development of this legislation for the last now almost a decade.
Okay. Judge Michel, you have one last comment, and then I think I'm going to open it up for questions.
Well, I just think it's important to look at how things evolve. In '99, the Congress passed a new re-examination procedure, and hardly anybody used it. So there was an absence of some sort of post-grant procedure that was being used and that seemed to work. So people said, this is oversimplifying it a little bit, of course, but all right, well, in Europe, they have something called a cancellation procedure. So let's adopt that European model so we have something since the re-examination process isn't being used. So that was the main premise for post-grant review. Meanwhile, the existing re-examination system now is being used routinely in conjunction with infringement cases. So the gap that was to be filled by this new post-grant review procedure modeled on Europe totally disappeared. Now 2/3 of the two-party re-exams involve cases in patents pending in district court. So the idea that we need a new additional procedure because the old ones aren't being used is now factually false.
Okay.
Yes, I know. I'm glad you raised actually the existing proceeding because it's a miserable place to be in. Right? So I think one way to look at the new inter partes review proceeding is that when you look at that compared to inter partes re-exam, I think the new proceeding is much preferable to the sad, miserable proceeding that we have going on right now in the PTO that never ends.
No offense, Dave.
No,
I mean, seriously, no, that's...
Well, this is why we need patent reform legislation, so...
I mean, at least in that respect, I'd much prefer what's in the bill over what companies are being subjected right now, at least if they're patent owners. If you're a challenger in inter partes re-exam, it's awesome, I'm being told. Right? The new proceeding is a lot less awesome. The funny thing is that a lot of the companies who were pushing for a wide open second window challenge proceeding are now pushing against the second window proceeding, if you will, that's in the bill, saying that's not good enough, that's worse than current law, which from their perspective, it probably is.
So, questions from the audience?
I know I'm sort of new to this issue. I've only been fooling with it for about 7 weeks now, but Dana, if this new post-grant review, all this new proceedings go into place, which I know is an open question, is the Copyright Office up to it?
Is the Patent Office up to it? The Patent Office is up to it.
Patent Office, sorry.
No,
I'm from the Copyright Office.
No worries. No, I think we are. Look, this is legislation that we have been looking at for a while. The CBO recently did a cost analysis. We spent a lot of time with them. I encourage folks to take a look at it in terms of how many judges we might need to add. We're very well aware that we're going to have to hire. And these are skilled professionals that are not easily found, I think, and the judge made this point, in government. But these are folks that we'll need to implement this system appropriately, and it's something that we can do.
Good morning. I'm Todd Wiggins. This question could go to either of you. How important is patent reform to the recovery of our economy? given obviously what's been going on the last couple of years, we're starting to, I think, peak out of this, what we're calling recession. And are we playing on an even playing field relative to our Asian counterparts, competitors, et cetera?
Well, let me start. I think we think it's critical. You know, I usually say to folks, you know, what's better if you're trying to improve the economic stability of a country, to get assets in the hands of those companies that can create jobs, build their companies, get new products on the market. You know, there's no better way to strengthen the company by doing it that way. And the work that the office does to facilitate that, to the extent we're doing it quickly, to the extent that we're doing it at a high quality level, which we think we are, increasingly so, even though we have a significant backlog, and Brian, I'll give you the numbers later. You know, we think it's absolutely critical, and this is why we've tied it to you know, the president's call for innovation, helping the U.S. out-innovate the rest of the world. You know, Sarah kind of made mention of this. You know, whoever thought that the president would mention the word patent in the State of the Union? I mean, there was screams and yells all over the patent office. We were very, very excited about it. So, I mean, we think it's absolutely critical. We think that we have an important part, just one part, by the way, just one part of getting those assets into the marketplace to help build companies, create jobs, and create new products.
I don't think it's an exaggeration when the director has said publicly, the PTO director, David Kapos, that trapped in the patent office today in the 1.2 million applications pending are thousands of companies, millions of jobs, and billions of dollars of new economic activity and growth. So it's absolutely vital to recovering from recession. It's vital to future global competitiveness. It's vital to technological leadership. We absolutely have to get this right for the short-term and long-term future of the country. And that's why I don't think rushing to legislative judgment is the right way to go.
I think there's a serious question whether at least some Asian countries, you know, are somewhat ahead of the United States with respect to the way they view investment in IP infrastructure as, you know, part of their strategic positioning competitively in the industrialized world and when they compete. So, for example, I was just recently told that in China, the Chinese Patent Office is now the biggest patent office in the world. They get more applications than the USPTO every year. They dispose of a lot of cases. The Chinese government has systematic incentives and policies in place where they support small and mid-sized Chinese businesses to actively seek IP rights. You know, they process them fast in the Chinese Patent Office. And I think somebody told me there are even grants available for small Chinese businesses to carry the burden of seeking IP rights overseas, like in the USPTO, because that's not cheap. And, you know, so I think, you know, once we start looking abroad and we become more aware of that, we might actually have a lesson to learn here.
And I think you need to look at the value of those rights as well, number one. But I think, Hans, you're absolutely right. I mean, and there's a lot of active conversation about, you know, what are we doing to help small businesses?
You know, it's been over 5 years of hearings and legislative proposals that have changed hugely. But there's one new fact that was not known until last year. And that came out of studies by the Kauffman Foundation and by the Census Bureau in the Department of Commerce, which established, I think quite convincingly, but you look at it yourselves, that most new jobs are created by smaller, emerging, fast-growing companies, what sometimes are called startups, and that most new wealth in this country in the last 4 decades has been created primarily by startups. So if we don't do anything else right in patent reform, we need to make sure that the patent system as it actually operates in reality and in practice works well for these patent-dependent startup companies, because while all companies are important, they are the most critical of all.
Let's sing another one at Dana. Many people in the patent community strongly agree with Judge Michel's points about funding. Fee diversion goes almost without saying. And also with the points about returning money to the patent office, although that's not in the bill. Is that something that the patent office agrees with, that some of that hundreds of millions should be returned? And if so, what's the plan? And the second part of my question is, if fee diversion doesn't go through in the current bill, Is there a plan for pursuing that in a separate bill later on?
So Matt, I blame the fact that you're sitting next to Tim is why you're asking the question. But for those in the room who know, I think the office is focused on what the resources we need right now to do the job. None of the changes in the bill would change the way the PTO develops its budget, sizes up the problem in front of it, and basically defends its budget on why we're spending the user fees that we collect appropriately. But the administration has consistently argued that the office should be able to access the fees it collects, and we can defend on how we're using them. I think, I spent a lot of time in the private sector as well, where I talked about the impact on the office over the last decade and not being able to access the fees that were being paid for the services, for services to be provided that weren't. So I think funding is absolutely critical for us, but we're focused on what are the resources we need now to get the job done. As I said, the director was up in front of the appropriations committees, beginning to defend the fiscal year FY12 budget, and defending the hires that we anticipate additionally hiring. We've hired quite a few people just this year within the limited continuing resolution that we can, as many as we can, to try to address the problem. We're going to have to do that for another year or two just to be able to get a handle on the backlog until we get to where we are at an optimal level. So I think we know that right now we have planned expenditures to pay the full year salaries of the folks that we're hiring today, mid-year, that we'll realize in year 3. So like any other business, we can look ahead and figure out how we need to operate and what we need. So I think nothing in the bill will change that. The bill as it is in the Senate adopts a provision that would allow, moving forward, all the fees that the agency collects to be dedicated to the agency. That gets to what we see as the solution. It's one way to get to that solution, ensuring that the fees stay with the agency. And I think that's a great way to do it. We've also been talking with our appropriators on make sure that regardless, this year, forget in the future, but this year that we have the resources we need, we're going to continue to fight that.
Fee diversion is not a past sin. It's happening today, every day this fiscal year because of the continuing resolution. The Patent Office is losing $1.5 million or so that they would have had if Congress had passed the budget that the Appropriations Committees approved last fall. Because it didn't, because we're under a CR, Capos is having to underspend $1.5 million per day every day. So he's already lost $100 million this current fiscal year, and he's losing more every single day. So this is an ongoing atrocity that Congress is allowing to happen.
I'll add one other thing. The FTC in 2003 came out with a report that kind of started a lot of this discussion. Yesterday they issued their second report, and a number of the issues that we're talking about, I think that report simply just emphasizes. Maybe the strongest point, maybe the point that I focus on the most is this call for funding again. So it's I think everyone in the community can rally around this issue, that adequate resources for the agency are very, very important. And the FTC report, again, in 2011, reiterates that call to action.
Going back to the issue that is now, Timothy Tardibona with Connect, based out of University of California, San Diego. Going to the issue that is finally now, because there's time to focus on it, the first to file issue. If you all remember the stakeholder meetings that went on, there were about 12 issues on the agenda, and first to file was about 10th or 11th, and now we're focusing on first to file. So I don't think it's that it hasn't been focused on, it just hasn't been given the attention. It's always been on the list of the issues that need to be addressed. But going to the debate that occurred last week, there was so much focus on interference proceedings and how interferences are bad for the little guy. And to clarify maybe one of your myths, I don't think the small startups are saying that the interference proceeding is good. And if there was a way to do away with the interference proceeding without restricting the grace period the way S23 does, I think you would see a lot of support for the first to file transition. So I guess my question is, And again, I don't think this startup side, the small business side, is saying there is no grace period in S23, because evidently there is. It's clear that there is. The question is, the S23 grace period restricts the current American grace period and limits, doesn't give good choices for startups and small business. So I guess the question is, taking interferences off the plate, and Judge Michel, obviously I'd like you to answer this as well. What is wrong with the current grace period as it relates to startups? How does the current grace period not help startups, not help small businesses that needs a fix?
I think the current grace period helps startups a lot. That's why they like it. But it was largely, not entirely, but largely taken out of the bill as a part of a series of political compromises as different stakeholders duked it out, and I guess the strongest prevailed. But in an ideal world, I would say you would want to shift to first to file, but with the current grace period, not with the highly truncated grace period of S23.
Yeah. And I mean, the price one would pay for that would be the price of increased uncertainty in the system, right? Because, if you say, well, go to a first to file system with the current grace period, basically what we're saying is we're going to a first to invent system within a year from filing. And that's going to necessitate that we maintain, other forms of prior art that, many of us would prefer not to live with. And frankly, the ability to swear behind as well. For those of you who aren't patent lawyers, that's not going to mean much, but it's the principle of if something gets published by whomever within the year before you file a patent application, you can swear in the patent office that, well, it was published before I filed, but I invented it before. And that destroys it as, prior art with respect to me. I can still get my patent. And you can imagine, while that may be legitimate from the small company's point of view, from the system's perspective, you've got to ask yourself, good, we're going to give that to small companies. Is the price of uncertainty that we pay for that a good price for that, or is it not? And that's a debate, frankly, that we haven't had, because I think you're right, Tim, that all this discussion about first of all focused on interferences, and which are pretty useless for small companies, and not on the other part of the grace period and how it might operate.
Congress has no evidence before it to allow it to do a cost-benefit relationship. Hans is exactly right. It may be that the cost of retaining the current grace period would outweigh the benefits, or maybe the other way around. But as far as I can tell, no one knows, no one could know. Congress has no empirical data on this to speak of at all. So they're just making a guess that it's a net benefit. But maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So I say don't do something significant unless you know it's highly likely to work beneficially.
Well, we have a lot of models in the rest of the world that are on first to file. I think the first thing to recognize is that grace period was not taken out of the bill, and there is a grace period in the bill. By the way, a grace period is a uniquely U.S. solution to this. There are other countries in the world, in fact, do not believe there should be a grace period and don't have them in their existing laws. So, this is something that we'll push for and we'll advocate as a good practice in the U.S. in our international negotiations. And there's quite a few discussions about patent law harmonization now, have been for many years. And these are things that we think in the U.S. make a good practice. So I think, when you're looking at the system from a high policy perspective, you want to make sure that you have a system that's clean, objective. This is the subjective elements of litigation that the FTC report in 2003 that initiated talked about quite a bit. The National Sciences Academy also addressed these issues. You want a clean, consistent a system that establishes rights and establishes effective dates in a fair and reasonable way. So a first to file system, again, 1966, the Johnson President's Commission. 1992, again, another cabinet level commission recommended to go to first to file. This has not been, there has not been a lack of discussion over the benefits here. The U.S. is the only country in the world that still relies on a first-to-invent system. I think there has been a lot of focus on interferences and how it doesn't serve the users, and I think that's true. Not only is it complex proceeding, that especially this target audience, the small entities, the less sophisticated companies that can't hire an outside counsel, need to try to navigate and frankly can't. To the tune of this, in the last 7 years, only one independent inventor would have had a different result in a first-to-invent system than in a first-to-file system. We went back and looked at our data. I think on the Senate floor, a number of senators said that USPTO commissioned a study. Well, we looked at our data. I'm not sure I'd call it a study. But that was the result. Add that onto the fact that the cost of the proceeding is very expensive, and not just filing, but again, the point's been made before, the legal costs surrounding using the system are tremendous. So for all those reasons, the current system really hasn't served that population. We think a first-to-file system will and provide much more certainty. No, I'm done. I'll stop. Tom?
Hi. Tom Sidner with Innovators Network, an association for competitive technology. Dana, a comment and a question. I wanted to, congratulate you for highlighting the importance of the fact that the proposed bill would give USPTO more regulatory authority than many patent bills have in the past. I've long said that we need to seriously consider whether perhaps both our copyright and our patent systems are over-legislated, over-litigated, and under-administered. And I thought that was one of the good things about the bill, and I thought you were right to highlight it. But I had a question about the essentially the issue that strikes me as the most important in the long run, and that's that getting good patents enforced internationally and making sure that other countries do not use bad patents as a means to exclude us from their markets. And obviously the concern there focuses on China. Those long-term interests, I think, depend critically on having the best and most functional patent office and patent system in the world. We have to lead by example. To what do you think Congress really, and particularly the appropriations committees, where we've had trouble getting done basic good government things like fee diversion legislation, really understand that it's not just a question of USPTO's functioning is critical to us domestically, but you're going to have to be a big part of our trade policy going forward. Because I think that is just the long-run truth. We need good patents enforced. We need to make sure that bad ones are not used against us.
I think that's right. I was looking for the question, but I think I agree with most of what you said.
Is this something that you think is on Congress's radar yet? Because I was back in the 108th Congress. I was IP counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I don't think I would have fully appreciated. I personally fully appreciated at that time just how trade related essentially the functioning of the patent office and our IP systems generally really are.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the better functioning that we are, the more efficient, the timely execution of the duties of the services that we provide actually absolutely benefit U.S. applicants to be able to acquire the rights here and then move quickly to a global market. Increasingly, more so during the duration of this debate, that's been the case. I think a number of small businesses included need to target a global market to be successful. So the administration's always seen first to file as an important piece of that, enabling us to simplify the process so that you can acquire rights here and then move abroad quickly. It also enables another important part, which is work sharing. So we've made a lot of progress working with foreign patent offices to make sure that we're not all doing the same work over and over again, which is again further delaying the process. The key is to get that innovator wherever he is in the world, hopefully here in the U.S., to be able to develop, protect his products quickly, and then figure out that market where he can be most successful. That's outside the PTO, but we have a big part of that by making sure that they can get the protection quickly and access that other market. So I think what you said is actually right.
If I can, Tom, by the way. Nice to see you, Tom. I think, I worked on Capitol Hill as well as in doing international trade as it happens. And I can tell you at the time that I did it a few years ago, there really was no coordination with PTO. And frankly, little involvement even with the Judiciary Committee in trade agreements dealing with intellectual property. I think that's changed a little bit. And I defer to Dana how much he talks with the folks at the Senate Finance or House Ways and Means Committee. I know the Senate Judiciary Committee has gotten a little bit more involved in trade agreements, but from the standpoint that they're concerned that our trade agreements are a little bit too prescriptive in what the trade agreements require of our trading partners and conversely of ourselves. So I think the conversation is just beginning now, and I think that's probably a positive. And I encourage you to do it more. I think the committees would be quite open to more coordination.
And I think we've been doing it more. I think from a PTO perspective, the office that I run, I think we've been trying to do more education outside of the committees of jurisdiction for PTO. Look, we're dealing with a very complex area of the law, so the import is not particularly clear from first glance, but clearly it does have large impacts. I think another thing that PTO has added to this discussion in recent years is the addition of IP attachés in embassies around the world. So we've been actually have a resource there that's helped U.S. business navigate those other markets, and we've actually helped work with those countries to identify how they can improve their systems to benefit U.S. applicants as well. So I think that's a big benefit. At the end of the day, it is enforcement. So there's the acquire your rights and then enforce your rights. We need to work on both of them.
I think you make a very deep point that each branch of government should be careful not to encroach on areas where the others have more experience or more expertise or more tools, and to focus on the things that branch can do best. And there certainly is a big question, at least in my mind, whether Congress isn't over-legislating in this bill. For example, if you look at the micromanagement provisions that were in the bill relating to damages in venue, willfulness and other subjects like that. If you look at the retained features, micromanaging procedures within the Patent Office, you got to ask to yourself, is it really something Congress is able to do to manage these kind of processes with all these complicated little deadlines followed by deadlines followed by deadlines and windows that are this long followed by another window that's that long? It seems to me that every time Congress tries to micromanage something in courts, they make it worse. And it's just the nature of the business. And they shouldn't try to micromanage the Patent Office either, in my opinion. Everybody agrees that the funding problem is the lion's share of the problem. And there may be a couple other things people can agree on, false marking perhaps, maybe even ultimately first to file. And maybe Congress would do better for themselves and for the country to be a little more modest and have a bill with 3 or 4 parts of it instead of 10 or 15 parts of it, some of which haven't been very well thought out in terms of their feasibility and their actual impacts.
My name is Rebecca Taylor. I am an entrepreneur, and I'm here doing a year of public service working with the State Department on entrepreneurship. I have learned a lot this morning. I have a couple of questions. One, my own first experience with the Patent Office was a patent I filed in the first quarter of 1999, and it issued in the second quarter of 2004. So apparently I'm above average in my experience in terms of how long it takes things to issue. I learned something at the last IP breakfast, which was a statistic that, Dana, one of your colleagues came out with that really shocked me, and it triggers another question for me today. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but she indicated, Elena, yeah. Yes, that was her name. Apparently 1 million patents were issued last year or the year before in China. Did I get that right?
Well, most of them, if that number is roughly in the ballpark, it mostly relates to not patents like we understand them.
Well, that was what I assumed, yeah.
Most of them are so-called utility models and the like, but a good chunk of them are like real patents, just the Chinese version.
Okay. So of the 1.2 million that Judge Michel indicated were in the backlog here, do you guys have any idea how many of those have been filed by foreign companies?
Yeah, just over half, that's right.
Okay, so some of this backlog that we're struggling to deal with is caused by other folks trying to come in and make use of the system.
And it's made up of 2 parts. It's made up of that 700,000 plus applications that haven't even gotten their first action. That's what we call 500 plus new applications coming in every year. So that's about that 1.
Yeah, and I just have huge respect for you guys, running hard and always falling behind. But as a patent owner and holder and having gone through this, the other thing I learned this morning, which is great, is the amount of focus that's going on in terms of trying to address some of the operational aspects of the Patent Office. I'm a little worried about this change to first to file as a small inventor, because it's not the fees charged by the Patent Office that's a big deal. Imagine, if you would, that you wake up this morning and you invent something. If in a first to file system, your next thought needs to be, how am I going to dig $10,000 or $20,000 out of my savings account to go pay for the legal fees to get something filed? And so my real question is, on a global scale, as small companies immediately have to go overseas, how much thought has been given into the impact of a first-to-file environment on the way that we need to collaborate through the process of invention that takes place before you approach the Patent Office? How will that change?
I think the first thing you should think of when you get out of bed in the morning and you come up with a new idea probably is, who else is working on this? And are they working on the same thing I'm working on? Or do I have actually something that's different from everything else that's been invented in the past? And if you're doing that, the system should encourage you, and this benefits everyone else actually working on this, to come to the office soon. Or to at least make a disclosure and tell the world, I'm working on this. I want to establish my rights here. And I think any attorney will tell you the more robust that disclosure is, certainly the better your chances are in keeping someone else from inventing on what you're doing or working in that area. So I think it's probably the first thing they should think about, closely followed by how are you going to pay the attorney's fees, which I think was your point. I think on that second point, the way that the office can help is to make the system accessible, make the system as easy as possible to understand, to file, to make those disclosures, in any different vehicle that you choose. Whether it's a provisional application or whether you're at the point when you can file an application. We should be able to have the resources at the office, and we do. We have an inventor's assistance line and other resources, an ombudsman program that we started with in the last couple of years to help applicants navigate the system. We should do all we can to allow you to access the system, just as any of the big guys can access the system. And I think the first to file transition actually helps us with that, and it also puts us on the same level playing field as the rest of the world. The most important thing under the new system, true today and true under the proposed bill, will be your effective filing date, and that's again true today as it will be in the future. The sooner you come to the office, the better. And that actually benefits the system.
To give you two scenarios real quick.
Can I just follow up on this one thing, and then we'll go to you. Dana, isn't there, in terms of answering the question about getting involved in the process of innovation and invention, isn't there something in the bill about special grace period for universities?
No.
No.
I wanted to, I'll give you the example. It's not a special grace period for
right.
universities.
Yeah.
It's a special grace period for, it's the grace period for disclosure. So to give you two scenarios, when you get up and you have a great invention, then you have two options under the bill as it's currently pending and under current law. So one is you can keep it secret. You can work on it some more. You can talk to people. Will they maybe invest? You have negotiations. After a year or year and a half, you go to the patent office. If you discover that somebody else invented it too and filed before you did, as a small inventor, you're going to lose, right? So, and that's under the current system or under any system, because you can't have the legal fees be part of your calculus when you're up against a big other competitor who beat you to the patent office. So that's the case today. It will be the case in the future. What you can do, though, under the Senate bill is you can get up in the morning, can think about your invention, write up the blueprints, and put it up on your website and say, will you invest in me? I have a great invention, or take it to a trade show, and whatever. And that disclosure has a date certain.
Yep.
That doesn't lie. And it destroys the patentability for anybody else who invents after you or who might have gotten it from you, so nobody else can beat you to the patent office after this day. Meanwhile, you as a small inventor have an absolute guarantee for a year from the day you put it up on your website or from the date you disclosed it at a trade show to file for a patent application that's ironclad. So the dates don't lie. When you go to the patent office, your entitlement to a patent, with respect to anybody else in the world, is going to be determined by when you filed and by the day you put it up on your website or on the day when you displayed it at your trade show. There's no arguing about those dates. They're objective and ascertainable. As opposed to the current first to invent system, where you never know if you're going to run into somebody who claims to have invented it before you did, unknowable to you or to anybody really. See, that's why, I think there's a lot of certainty built into the system that goes to the benefit of those who are willing to disclose and do, what I described. It works to the disadvantage of those who keep their inventions secret, who conceal them, and who eventually go to the patent office.
Right.
Right?
Right. No, I think that's right. And it encourages a system that incentivizes early disclosure, which makes a more objective system for all inventors.
Okay.
And basically, what Hans was
Just,
saying is,
can you wrap this up?
Yeah, you got it. When you make that disclosure, the clock starts ticking. It says within a year you should come to the office. Now, if you decide not to come to the office, or you're too slow to come to the office, don't worry, there's remedy for you. Under the bill, there's also the only part of interferences that really goes to the issue of who invented first. This is the derivation proceeding. If someone else got to the office and they derived that invention from you, you can go to the office and say, unfair, let's get rid of their rights.
How can you prove it? You don't have subpoena power. How can you get the other guy's documents? His documents are going to show whether he stole your idea. Your documents won't show that. Without subpoena power, the derivation proceeding looks pretty hollow to me.
Well, but there is ability to have some discovery. And there's not subpoena power, certainly, but there is discovery in these proceedings, and that you can prove your case.
It's a contested proceeding.
It's a contested proceeding in the office in front of the board. So, Judge, you're right, and many of these things are going to be new skills that these judges haven't done before. There's going to be a learning curve. But these limited discovering proceedings at the office, brand new, will allow some of that evidence to come in.
Okay, on that note, I'm afraid we have to wrap up. Thank you. Please give a hand to our panelists. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming.
I want to thank you all for coming. And point your attention to our upcoming, Intellectual Property Breakfast Club events. On Tuesday, April 12th, we'll have the costs of global intellectual property piracy. How can they be empirically quantified? And on Tuesday, May 10th, we'll have digital video recorders, the Cablevision decision, and industry licensing agreements. Please join me in thanking our sponsors, the National Cable and Telecommunications Association and Public Knowledge. And there's surveys on your table. There's not enough today, so if you want a survey sent to you, please let me know. Thank you.